Welcome to the meeting of the Policy, Finance and Development Committee held at the Council offices 16th of November 2021 at 7 p.m. In accordance with the openness of Local Bodies Regulation 2014, this meeting is being live streamed and may otherwise be recorded, filmed or communicated on other media platforms. The recording of this meeting will be made available on the Council's YouTube channel shortly after the meeting. Both councillors and officers in attendance are reminded to make full use of and to speak clearly into the microphones available at all times. A reminder that mobile phones should be turned off or put on silent mode. Those present at the meeting should refrain from taking telephone calls. A polite reminder that those members of the public in attendance must not act in a disorderly or disruptive manner or otherwise interfere with the proper conduct of its business. Right, we'll move to the agenda. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence.
These absence have been received from Councillor Adam, Councillor Richard Morris, Councillor Sharon Morris, Councillor Clark, Councillor Carter, Councillor Gattariah, Councillor Rob Eaton, Councillor Linda Eaton, and Councillor Kowalski.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 2, appointments of substitutes. Are there any substitutes? Thank you. 3, declarations of interest. Does any councillor have an interest to declare? Thank you. Minutes of the last meeting. You can confirm and sign the minutes of the previous meeting. All those in favour? Any against? Thank you.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Kevin Lloyd.
Sorry, I needed just to get some clarification on one of the items, Chairman.
Okay.
5, if I may. Item 53. Unless we resolve that, it's just a small 2 at the end. The last sentence talking about with any expenditure in excess of £10,000 over budget explain. Can somebody explain what that means, please?
Over to you, Connie.
At the last, sorry, I haven't got the minutes in front of me, but at the last meeting, it was agreed that if it's expenditure over 10,000, and that you would require an explanation of what the variance was.
If I may, it was over, they want an explanation. We want an explanation before to say, well, if it's going to go over 10,000, we want to find out, we want to stop it from going over 10,000, not go over 10,000 and then report it. That's what I'm trying to say. See what you know what I mean? We don't operate in a deficit budget, do we? We operate.
Agreed.
You've got a certain amount of money to spend, you can only spend that, not go 10,000 over.
Councillor Lloyd, that is what the committee agreed.
That's all. I know it's not what I put forward anyway.
Thank you. Any of the other questions? We take the vote. All those in favour of signing, thank you. Any against? Any abstentions? Abstention. Councillor Lloyd. Item 5, agenda item 5, action list arising from the previous meeting. No action list arising from the meeting. Agenda item 6, petitions and deputations. Are there any? Agenda item 7, financial outturn report. Q2 2021-22. Pages 7 to 20, over to you, Connie.
This report is the Q2 financial return, and in summary, we're overspent by £335,000. This is mainly due to an underachievement of £455,000 of income. And briefly, I'm going to just go through the report. The key areas where there's underachievement of income is car parking, where the budget was 250,000 and we're forecasting to receive 95,000 this year, which is a shortfall of 155,000. And secondly, selective licensing, where there's a budget of 550,000, we're expecting to achieve 250,000, which is a shortfall of 300,000. The report outlines some of the reasons why. The initial budget was 800k for selective licensing. We're expecting probably over the duration of the scheme to achieve 698,000. And there's a table that gives a rough estimate of what we're expecting to achieve. And this scheme was always, the income was always front loaded to the earlier years. Moving on to the forecast, we've got the senior leadership team, which has underspend of 230,000, which is mainly due to staff savings for the two director posts. And table 4.2 highlights the situation. We've received various different grants throughout the year, and so far we're expecting to receive 706,000 of grants. This may increase slightly, and we've offset that against 706,000 qualifying expenditure. When we go into some further descriptions about the COVID situation, but if you look at paragraph 4.5, just some good news. The council's given out in business grants 1.458 million in the restart grants, and a further 963,000 in additional restrictions grants. This is talking out to over the last year. We go to 4.6, it shows that there's a forecast overspend of 26,000 in the finance resources area, and the table enclosed in 4.6 just shows a brief explanation of the areas that are overspent. It includes the car parking and one or two other areas, like for instance, there's a lot in corporate management, there's 94,000, and this is due to 53k excess pension costs and 41k in investment income that's not achievable, as the council hasn't put forward any major investments. At the time we were going to invest in certain property funds, but we didn't go ahead with that. And if you move to 4.7, law and democracy, there's a forecast overspend of 284k, which in effect we are not being able to achieve the selective licensing income. It's affected that forecast. So we've got 300 deficit in the income. The built environment is forecast overspend of 84,000. And there's a table in 4.8, which highlights the areas where there's an overspend. The largest area is in the planning, 147,000. This is due to a forecast increase in agency costs to cover too hard to fill posts in that service. But efforts have been made to try and recruit someone, but people in posts, but it is a very difficult area to recruit to. And the other reasons for the other overspends or slight underspends are also shown in the table. Moving to community and wellbeing in 4.9, there's a forecast overspend of 44,000. The various reasons are highlighted in the table. They range from 29,000 to underspend of 20,000. Moving on to 4.10, customer services and business transformation. There's a forecast overspend of 126,000, but what I would just like to point out, there may be areas where perhaps we'll capitalise IT staffing costs later on in the year, dependent on some capital projects going forward. So there possibly could be a significant reduction in that overspend. And moving on to 4.11, table 3, it just shows a summary of the different service areas and highlights what their variances are, ranging from the senior leadership team, underspend of 230k, and it shows us overspends in the other service areas, which nets off to overspend of 334,000 for the reasons that have been highlighted earlier in the budget. Table 4, I just wanted to point this one out. It shows that what the income loss is to the actual authority of 455. But if you look slightly below, if you take into account what the overspends are 110,000. The actual savings is in-year savings of 230. So in effect, the council has made savings of 120,000. It's just because we can't achieve income targets is the reason why there's an overspend. Item 5 is the capital programme. And there's an appendix 1 that goes into detail of what the current capital programme is. But if we look at table 5, it just gives a summary of it. So it shows the general fund. This budget is now 4.6 million for this, and the spend to date is 1.3. Shows a variance of 3 billion. Then we've got the housing revenue account, which has a budget of 2.49 million, and the spend to date is 2.014 million, so 435,000. And then item 6 is about the HRA, and just in general, the HRA for this financial year is showing a slight overspend of 74,000. The main reason behind that is additional depreciation costs that were incurred due to the revaluation of some of the assets. So that's gone through, which has put a pressure on that budget for this year. But the HRA currently has a reserve of 1,339,000, which, if you take into account that pressure, will then drop down to estimated to be about 1,265,000. And then in this report, we've also got some Treasury Management information, which shows, and the Appendix 2 gives a table of, just for some useful information, our short-term, long-term borrowing and borrowing with the Public Works Loan Board. I'll leave members to have a look at their leisure. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask me afterwards. Sorry. And then paragraphs 7.2 to 7.5 talks about the Treasury Management policy. The general gist is that the council, as a local authority, has to be very careful the way it invests, and also and borrow from the Public Works Loan Board at preferential rates for funding the capital programme. But just to let members know that throughout the year, the council does receive various different income, and it does get some interest, but interest rates are not that great at the moment. That's it for the budget management report. Chair, take any questions at this point?
I'll just say to the committee that any technical questions which comment that I can answer this evening, give written replies, and they'll go to all councillors. Okay, over to the committee. Questions and answers. Councillor Geoffrey Kaufman.
Thank you, Chair. Can I go back to page questions? So my first question relates to the £95,000, which is the forecast income now. that we start charging for parking? Bring the new figures in.
Yeah, so with car parking, the original start date was November, and with the permits, I think we're going to be looking at issuing the permits soon. And with the actual basis of this actual forecast, we were never going to have a full year of income. A full year's income would have been 250,000. So this estimate is based pro rata throughout the year, and it's also based on the car parking manager's estimate of the income we'll get in. Obviously, it's quite theoretical at this point in time. Until the car parking is fully implemented, that figure could change. It could be higher, it could be lower, but we have to put in an estimate at this point in time.
Yeah, but I just wondered when this 95, when you put this 95, when this figure of 95,000 was put down, what date were we anticipating starting charging? If it was November, it's going to be less than that. If it was later than that, it could be more than that.
We anticipate starting in charge in November, but the other thing you have to bear in mind is when we start issuing permits, members of the public will be paying up front, so we'll be actually getting money in early. So it's not, so you can't just pro-rata it with months. So if you're getting permits...
So we think it's realistic?
At the moment, that's the best information we've got.
Okay, thank you.
Until we hit Q3, when we start getting some information through, we'll be able to give a more realistic forecast.
Thank you. My second question relates to selective licensing. On this table 1, you've got the figures of where the estimated income is. This is news for us. And I just wondered that when we did the original budget, what would those figures have been for income over years 1 to 5? When we did our original budget, what did we anticipate that were 1, 2, 2 and 3 would be?
Right, so with the original budget, it was anticipated that we received £800,000 of income. And the nature of the selective licensing scheme is you get most of that money up front. So the way I've shown it in this table, I've prorated it over 3 years. Going back to when the original report was, I don't think there was a table showing the pro rata, but most of the money would have probably come in the first, as like I've got here, first 2 to 3 years. But I don't remember seeing the table.
It's just that I take private eye. I don't know whether you ever read it. There's a section called Rotten Boroughs. And this week's, and it talked about a problem that Cambridgeshire, in the way that they were, it was described in the magazine as trying to calculate, assume in this year's accounts that you can get wages in 5 years' time. And I just wondered whether somewhere along the line we had picked up the wrong information. And I was just trying to identify. So are you saying that this year's money is what we realistically would have expected? It's just that we're 100. We miscounted the number of properties that are liable for that.
Sorry, can I come in?
Over to you, Mr. Gill.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify the position, when selective licensing, the report came before council, the report suggested that there were 885 privately rented houses in South Wixton. The current numbers that we've identified are 818, leaving a shortfall of 67. And that 67 will include houses that are entitled to an exemption under the scheme, coupled with houses that were sold by landlords prior to the scheme coming into force. Because as you would appreciate, the scheme was adopted early part of the year, was due to come into force in May, but because of the pandemic, it didn't come into force until November. So the projected income from the 67 properties would have been approximately £63,500. And the remaining shortfall is because to date, we have not had to issue any civil penalties. We have issued civil penalty intention notices, and each of those implies that you will be liable for a civil penalty of £3,000. but on every occasion that that's landed on somebody's doormat, they have licensed their property as they're entitled to, and therefore the money that we've got is actually just been the license fee and the enforcement fee. So I am satisfied that the figures that were given in the report back in last year were actually very, very accurate. And you look at, what we have achieved, the 818 compared to the forecast of 885, I think the officers have done remarkably well. And over the past 18 months, they've raised £460,000 in cash. And given that they didn't start until November, again, that's a testament to the hard work that's been done.
So unfortunately, we've got so many people law observing, but I just wondered, how do we keep track of new properties that have been turned into rent to buy or whatever it is? I assume somewhere along the line, somebody notifies us. So if 67 have been taken off the market, I assume somebody somewhere along the line is still investing in property. So how do we know about that?
What happens is every time a property that is currently a privately rented property is sold, we make contact with the current landlord to confirm whether or not the sale was a residential sale or a commercial sale. We also have access to the deposit accounts. Every landlord is required to put the tenant's deposit into an account, and we regularly get updates from all of the main deposit accounts that operate across the country and particularly in the borough. And from that, we can then double check and confirm whether or not that property is a rented property and requires to be licensed.
So this figure is a net figure. We've had some additional properties that have been rented because you've been able to pick them up.
That's correct. The issue is that the number of properties will always fluctuate because on occasions, a privately rented property may be let to a family member and therefore it's exempt. People buy properties that were previously residential and turn them into private lets, which then attracts the charge. So the officers are constantly reviewing this and making sure that the figures that we have got are correct.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Catherine. Councillor Boyce.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things I need to clarify, I think. On car parks, it's become clear that we are obviously not going to make the November date. There are a number of technical reasons for that, not least of all the county didn't give permission by the appropriate time, and sourcing of the appropriate machines at the appropriate price is also rather important. You could buy a Rolls Royce, but then you end up actually making less money. Therefore, we have spent a lot of time ensuring we get the right machines at the right price. So for clarity and frankly, for the good of our traders, we have come to the conclusion that the car parking regime will start on the 4th of January. I think it's the 4th. It's the first date in January anyway. However, we will put on sale the permits for next year sometime in December at an appropriate time, which slightly makes the world even more confusing because the third quarter outturn may include very little in terms of income, because I suspect the bulk of it will actually come in January, which just makes life even more confusing. It's where budgeting and budget forecasts move from science to art. It isn't straightforward. It's the end of the year issues which we are most interested in. That should become clear. In terms of selective licensing, we've taken pragmatic steps in the current budget, but clearly over time, the expenditure on selective licensing will have to be focused in the areas where it was generated, because that is the logic of selective licensing. So that is another pressure on the general fund, is the fact that that money will have to be spent over the next 5 years and will have to be spent basically in South Wigston. So beyond that, obviously this evening, the reason for this meeting is the budget going forward. but you can't deal with the budget going forward unless you know where you are. And that's why the outturn report has been brought forward to now. Clearly, that puts in context the next two reports. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Boyce. Councillor Bolter.
Chair, one or two bits I'd like to be clarified, please. Looking down the list on 4.9, mechanics workshop. Water depot.
Over to you, Mr. Gill.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah, the reason why it was expensive was because it was backdated from October 19 through to 21.
That's an awful lot of money per month.
It still is, but of course, when we have the vehicles down there that are loading up and the street sweeper that's filling up with litres of water every day to go out in the street, we do use a lot of water. We are satisfied that the figure was correct. It was just unfortunate that the bill wasn't sent at the appropriate time and it came as a lump sum.
Okay, well, we'll watch that with interest then. And the next item, grounds maintenance, £10,000 for equipment. Should that be capital or not revenue? We usually buy equipment on capital or not revenue.
When it says equipment, normally capital's larger spend than 10,000. I mean, I think it's a combination of different items. So that wouldn't normally be capitalised.
Okay, can we move down the page to 410 then? Customer service improvement, £18,000 overspend. Customer service is £41,000 overspend. The explanation is because of the telephone been diverted to people's homes. Sounds an awful lot of money for diverting. What system are we using? And we looked at alternatives to that.
Philip is on.
I'll answer the question.
Yeah, Philip is on Shield. He raised a hand. So.
Over to you, Philippa.
Thank you. Councillor Bolter, the 41,000 is basically to do with our diversion when we went remotely and virtually due to COVID, and the actual system that we utilised through our third party charged us for calls coming in, which were non-geographical calls, and then onward transmission of our calls once they actually reach the council. Going forward, we are actually moving away from the vendor that we currently use as part of our ICT transition. So costs should reflect that going forward.
Must be an awful lot of telephone calls to make £41,000 diversion. How much we're paying per button?
The challenge is every single call that comes into the council, and you'll obviously be aware from that from the service delivery committee and the call volumes that come into that, we were being charged for those calls coming in. And the onward transmission of those as well.
Thank you, Philippa. Any more questions, Councillor Bolter?
Nothing to do for now, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Linda Broadley.
Thank you, Chair. Also on these telephone calls, looking to the future, we are talking about remote working, and my concern is if it's cost 41,000 this time, we're hoping to make a savings by reducing and moving to Brox Hill. We're not likely to make such big savings if we've got this sort of increase in telephone services. So what is going to be done to offset all these increases?
Over to you, Philippa.
Councillor Broadley, as part of our ICT transition, we have improved our technology vastly and have different mechanisms going forward, utilising, as I said, different technology to actually make telephone calls. So, for example, our system through Teams, we will be actually able to use telephone calls through Wi-Fi rather than actually using the old-fashioned way of picking up a telephone and direct dialing. So, from a point of view, from a point of view of technology, we should see those costs drastically reduce.
Right. So what you're saying then is somebody, a resident brings into the council, and their call is then forwarded on to somebody, and the cost is going to be very low.
It's going to be lower. I think one of the things that councillors also need to be aware of is, as part of our ICT transition, we have reviewed and renewed our contract with a different vendor, and therefore the rates are different as well going forward from 2022.
Right. And presumably the rates and things will come forward to councillors so that councillors can see that.
I'd be happy to share that, yes.
Thank you, Philippa. Any more questions, Councillor Broadley?
No, that's it, Chair.
Councillor Kevin Lloydham.
Chair, just a couple of things, if I may. Page 11 again. I'm talking about the IT staffing cost, etc. Just need some clarification in the. We had a contract, or have a contract with an external provider. Understands it? Therefore, we would be paying that particular provider some money to provide that service, wouldn't we? Therefore, then we're taking it back in-house. So the contract, I don't know, it comes to an end. So therefore, there should be some savings there, because we're not paying that provider, we're now bringing that money back in-house. But then we're overspent. Firstly, when we decided to bring it back in-house, was there a budget for it in the first place? If there was a budget for it, obviously it wasn't enough. So did we do the own work first before we decided to bring it back in-house?
Thank you, Councillor. Over to you, Philippa.
Thank you. Councillor Lloydell, if you're talking regarding the system support administration, that was always, and that's always been, an internal service provided by us as a council for our technologies that we utilise and systems that we utilise. Regarding the third party and moving back in-house, whilst yes, we want to make savings as much as we can, realistically bringing a service back in-house, we still have to provide a full ICT service provision. So at this moment in time, it wasn't to reduce costs, it was to give us greater flexibility, it was to give us more control. We know from the service that we've received, it hasn't been as good as it could have been, and so from a council perspective, it was the right thing to do to bring it back in-house. From a point of view as cost saving, my understanding is that when we originally brought it in-house, it was not as a cost-saving initiative, but to give us greater flexibility. And if we could make cost-saving initiatives, then we would actually do that.
Philippa. Councillor Lloydham.
I didn't understand any of that, but okay. I still didn't answer the question, does it? One contract comes off, you're paying for that contract, you're bringing it back in-house, that contract goes, therefore the money comes back with it. If it's done properly, where does the overspend come from? I know about systems and all the rest of it, but it doesn't make sense.
Okay, Councillor Lloydham, over to you, Anne.
Thank you, Chair. We are in a transition phase. We have had to start and implement insourcing and get our resources in, but at the same time, we are still part of the external provision this year, which ends on the 31st of December. So we've had to invest this year, had to do a double spend. We've got to keep the service going. We've had to invest in the resources to make the transition. So that's why this year there's been no additional costs, as I understand it.
Thank you, Anne. Any more questions, Councillor Lloyd?
So therefore, that transitional cost, once the contract's end, we should be getting some money back. That should make sense for any contract which I've dealt with in the past. Anyway, let's move on to 41. Sorry, customer services and the telephone system. You mentioned that the fact, because people are working from home and you're having to divert the calls, etc. Is that not then identified as COVID related and you can claim some of that back?
Over to you, Conway.
COVID-related costs, possibly some of it could be claimed against the COVID-related costs, but a lot of the costs we've got relate mainly to the Revs and Benefits team who are delivering business grants and also providing services to the vulnerable through the council tax, so the business rates. So there are council costs across the board that, yes, may qualify for the COVID, and this is some of these costs possibly, but a lot of it's contractual. So if it's a contractual obligation we had before COVID, it's 50-50. So I will review it, but at the moment we're showing it as an overspend.
Conway, if you could review it and let us all know. Over to you, Joe.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
If I could just add to that as well, we did get some upfront support for COVID costs, and there was quite a lot going on during last year. What we're mainly left with this year is recovery of some of our income that's gone down because of COVID. So they've moved away really from supporting our costs towards replacing our lost income, and still not 100%. So where the position we find ourselves in now is the upfront support we had for costs mainly came last year in 2021. And here we are in 21-22. And what they're concentrating on now is income, and what income we've lost, which are directly related to COVID and of course business rates. So this sort of thing, we struggle to get it passed. And I think, as Connie said, in the budget monitoring, we have committed the funds that we've had for COVID against additional spend that we've already had. It's very difficult. It's a tenuous link, I'm afraid.
Can I welcome you to this committee? I should have done that beforehand. So go easy, Councillor Lloyd. Thank you.
I just want to thank everybody for their answers to the questions. I'm grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lloyd. Councillor Hack.
Just a couple of questions regarding the car park and the selective licensing. As the selective licensing, still the borough, is that still on?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, what we will be doing over the next 12 to 18 months is reviewing the rental market in various other areas of the borough. As you'll be aware, when this matter came before the scheme was adopted, there are certain criteria that need to be met, and officers will be looking to see whether or not any areas in their entirety, i.e. Oakley or Wigston, or even small areas in particular wards, meet that criteria with a view to introducing it across the borough.
Thank you, Mr. Gill. Councillor Hack.
Thank you, Chair. Even if they don't meet the criteria, as a suggestion to generating income, can we offer that to some of the landlords as a private measure, so it can attract who are willing to pay for that service?
I think you're suggesting some form of accreditation scheme that we could, where we offer a service to landlords. It's something we can certainly consider. I know that other authorities actually allow private landlords to advertise their lets on council websites and on their housing websites. So it's certainly something that we can consider going forward.
Thank you. And regarding the car parks, how is the yearly permit going to work? Is that going to be similar to the green waste, garden waste? Are we going to do it as and when people come forward, or are we going to section the last 3 months of this year and add them on? Can they have the option to purchase for 13 months if they wanted to? So then we can tie it in with our next financial year. Is that possible?
The position is that we can offer a whole variety of car parking charges. We can do a 12-month, we can do a 6-month. It's a matter of amendments. The problem that you have is that the more variations of permits you have, the more difficult it becomes to understand when you're applying for them, because we as a council will not have any involvement with the issue of the permit. It'll be done through a company, through a website, where we will have a link on our own website. You click the link, it will take you to the appropriate page. And as you appreciate, there are a number of variables. There's the Oakley one, there's one for Wigston, South Wigston, there's one for the leisure parks, there's one for Countersthorpe Road for term time. So there's a whole combination. And I'd say I would be, in the first phases, I would like to keep it as simple as possible so that it don't cause any confusion for the public.
No, sorry, can I come back to it? I wasn't talking about as an ongoing measure, just for this year, because we're going to offer it towards the end of the year, just for the first permit. And then it can be renewed yearly, like we do the garden waste.
That's not something that we've considered. Obviously, I think I'll need to have a word with Commy and also take a lead from Councillor Boyce. The issue then becomes about pro-rating. It becomes very messy if you're dividing £25 by 4 quarters and asking somebody to pay a permit for 1 quarter. You then start getting into issues of viability and the cost that's involved, because it does make it difficult for the supplier.
Councillor Boyce.
Thank you. Obviously, on that point, as we stand at the moment, our income is an estimate. It's an estimate based on the usage of the car parks, the number of spaces, and the projected usage going forward. It's also true that £25 compared with other places to park is rather good value. So you are going to have some shift away because we're charging, and potentially some shift towards because we're extremely cheap. However, with any estimate, what you really need is certainty. And in the first year, to actually maintain certainty by offering a 12-month permit for everybody who applies at the right time gives us the certainty in future years to plan against known figures rather than estimated figures. So I very much would go with 12 months starting from January. If you apply in February, then it starts from the day you apply for 12 months. That will, over the next 2 years, give us some certainty. And then if we have to then take it to, like the green waste, to an annual from April, we can do that in 2 or 3 years' time when we have the certainty. And putting it simply, it could be that £25, it stays at £25 forever, because that may well bring in enough money to make it balance against the expenditure. As equally, it depends on the take-up. So I simply don't know, and we do not know at this point the balance between permit holders and pay and display people. Therefore, at this moment in time, we need the certainty, and going for an annual permit from January is the most sensible course of action.
Thank you, Councillor Boyce. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair. Just some quite quick questions with regards to car park charges. I just wanted to confirm whether council will still keep car park charges as they are, even though there's a shortfall of 150k to increase charges later on to look at that.
Councillor Allen, the chair was about to call me, and I think what I said previously is precisely that. I do not envisage this car parking system changing for at least 2 to 3 years until it's bedded in and we understand our income. I mean, one would hope that it stays at this level for a significant length of time, but you cannot tell until you've actually tested the market by introducing the scheme.
The other question was regards to the £25. I understand that there's already permits issued. Businesses, do they buy a car park permit at all? Is there some revenue?
Over to you, Mr. Gill.
There are various permits in the borough. County Council operate a residence parking scheme in Kirkdale Road and areas like that. There are permits that we issue for people that park on Elston Lane car park because they don't have access to parking on the front. I'm aware that some companies charge, if you want to go and park your car for a month for long stay, you can park it on the roof of Sainsbury's at £40 a month. I know that with a number of other schemes, since the council decided that it was going to introduce car parking, I've noticed that the plough next door has got a parking scheme introduced, the Elms have got a scheme introduced. So there's various numbers. But the important thing for the council is that in the context of all of those things, we are very competitive, and the price that we are asking for parking in a town centre only is very competitive compared to other places.
Thank you, Mr. Gill. Councillor Lamb.
Just the last question was in regards to policing the car parking. If fines are issued, and who will get the bulk share of that fine if people are prosecuted? Will it go to the borough?
Currently have a shared arrangement with Harborough and the county. Harborough provide us with the civil enforcement officers, county provide us with the backroom processing of the tickets. What will happen, those people that buy a permit, the fact that they have a permit, their details will be automatically downloaded to the portable devices that the CEOs use. They'll be able to tell instantly whether a vehicle has a permit. In the event that it doesn't have a permit or another contravention of the rules is established, the CEO will issue the ticket. The ticket is processed by county, but the and obviously there is an arrangement because Harbour's CEOs don't do it for nothing, shall we say. We have a payment arrangement with them. There's also a similar arrangement with county, but the vast majority of that income will come to us.
Thank you.
Councillor Lamb. Councillor Bentley.
Just a couple of questions. Selective licensing. So we charge each landlord a certain amount of money for get that. We're a landlord. Do we have to pay the fee?
Registered landlords are exempt from such schemes, Councillor Bentley, so no, we don't have to pay the fee.
Good. Regarding the appendix 1, there are quite a few items in the 2021-22 budget are not actually budgeted for. Yet some of them have got quite significant spends against them. How is that managed and controlled? Is it just money that's spent with no authorisation, or is it actually controlled, and how do we control them?
Can you give some examples, please?
Page 2, going down the line, 56013 to 56044. There are 5 items that are non-budgeted, with total spend coming on to £30,000. There are various items above that as well. Then we've got contingencies, miscellaneous hardware for home working, telephone restructuring, 11,271, obsolete PO under old ICC arrangements. Surely some of these things would be known.
Councillor Bentley, I will get Commy to do a written reply, because obviously this is going very technical, these issues.
The concern is that there's quite a few items that are non-budgeted that do have some significant spend against them, and it all adds up.
Yeah.
And as we're looking at the shortfall in income, and I'd like to know where it's all going and why it's going.
Yeah.
Other than that, can I move the report?
Thank you, Councillor Bentley. Are there any more? Who's Councillor Lily Kaufman?
Well, very simply, Joe said that we have to create income. She's quite right. I was wondering about planning applications. Is there a statutory fee that each local authority has to put on planning applications, or could we increase the fee for planning applications?
Generally, planning applications, the fees are statutory. So they're set by government and we receive the income, but we couldn't suddenly decide we're going to increase them tomorrow by 50% or 100%.
Okay.
Councillor Boyce.
Thank you, Chair. We've actually done rather well on getting through this report. So for clarity, can I move the report recommendations as written? However, can I also offer any member, whether present or remotely, who has further questions, if they can write them into Commy, he will answer them, and this report will now not come back to the next meeting of this committee. If that is acceptable, I so move.
Councillor Boyce, Councillor Bentley has already moved the report, so do you want to second it?
Yeah.
Won't it come back? Why won't it come back?
It doesn't need to, unless you, look, it's because I'm making the offer, you've got further questions, should you have them? I'm just, sorry, I'm just mindful of the fact that in December, there is a significant amount of work to be done, and I'm managing that work. I mean, clearly, if there are still further questions, and I'm perfectly happy that to be further questions, then let the questions be written to Commy, and if necessary, we'll discuss the answers in December. Is that acceptable?
Okay.
All right. I'm managing the workload.
Yeah.
So I so second if that's required.
Thank you, Councillor Boyce. Councillor Linda Broadley.
Thank you. It's not a question I want to put down in writing and have afterwards. I want to sort of expand on what Lee just said and about these items that were on here without a budget to begin with. And following on from that is to what Councillor Lloydell said at the very beginning, before we actually looked at this report, about the minutes of the meeting and what was said about budgeting. And Councillor Lloydell is correct that what is written on this report, on this minutes, is wrong. We asked for that somebody was to bring something to a committee that wanted to overrun, not afterwards. So the what was given at the beginning was totally wrong. Councillor Lloydell was correct. We asked for anything that was going to overrun to come to us prior to it overrunning. That's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Councillor Fritzy.
All right. I was going to just write in, but can you hear me?
No.
It's not on. There we go. Again, I think we probably killed the car park issue quite quickly and it's dying its death. But my concern is not just about the car park, but it's about the figures that we've got. Like the selective licensing, we were hoping we were going to get over 800,000 if it all went to as it did. We didn't seem to have a contingency on the budget there to say that we may not get that, we may be underrun. Have we got a similar thing for the car parking? Because we're going to have to pay every year we run that car park for the equipment that we're going to have to put in. And we're saying we should still make 95k is the forecast. What if we don't make 95k? What if the residents of Oadby, Wigston, South Wigston don't want to buy the permits? Then what do we do? Do we have a plan B?
Mr. Gill.
Thank you, Chair. Just dealing with selective licensing, when I gave the answer earlier, I explained in some detail about the amount that was forecast in the budget when the report came to council to approve the selective licensing scheme. And I explained the variance in that and the fact that we'd gone from 800,000 to about 700,000, and that is in a state of flux. Unfortunately, in the budget, there was an overinflation of what people thought we would get. The figures that you were given in that initial report when selective licensing was adopted are correct. And that's the point I made, that the officers made a very accurate indication of what was going to be achieved. How and why it was overinflated in the other figures, I don't know, but I'm not pointing fingers, I'm not the accountant. In terms of car parking, I have a sense, actually, that the car parking permit scheme is going to be very successful. And the reason I say that is because we're getting people ringing up already saying, where can I buy my permits? And how much is it going to cost me? And when you say to them, it's 25 up in Oadby, they fall off the chair because they can't believe how cheap it is. On the £95 that is in the 95,000 is in this budget, I am confident that by the end of the financial year that will be reached. In fact, I think it'll be more than that that's reached. So I have no concerns on the car parking front.
We have that on record, so we'll see. Right,
I think it's called a P45.
Yeah. Right, we've had a proposer and seconder. I'm going to put it to the vote. You see the recommendations. All those in favour? I think that's unanimous. Thank you. Exclusion of the press and public. Resolve that under section 100A, paragraph 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public now be excluded from the remainder of the meeting on the grounds that business to be transacted involves the disclosure of exempt information found in Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act as amended. And in all the circumstances, the public interest maintaining the exempt items outweigh the public interest disclosing the exempt information. The live stream of this meeting will now be stopped. All those in favour? Thank you. I think that's unanimous.